For 7 years, Kelsey Vicker believed her marriage to Spencer Vicker was a quiet, comfortable partnership. They had the suburban house, the two kids, the predictable rhythm of life in Omaha, Nebraska. Every night, Mark would kiss her goodbye, say he was working late at the firm, and head out into the darkening sky. But what Kelsey Vicker didn't know was that working late meant a clandestine rendezvous, a secret life meticulously constructed with another woman who thought she was the only one. And on a chilly October evening in 2023, a single misplaced text message would shatter the illusion, setting off a chain of events that would reveal the devastating truth behind Vickers' double life. Spencer Vickers lived a life meticulously crafted for appearances. At 38, he was the picture of suburban normalcy, a stable job in regional sales, a comfortable home in Oakwood Hills, and two bright children, Lily and Tom, who were his undeniable anchors. His wife, Kelsey, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering devotion, was the foundation upon which this carefully constructed world rested. But beneath the veneer of professional reliability, symbolized by his wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his average nose, and his standard uniform of smart casual button-downs and chinos, a restless discontent simmered. Spencer carried the weight of his unfulfilled desires like a secret burden. He harbored a deep-seated fear of mediocrity, a persistent whisper that the conventional path he'd chosen, marriage at a young age, a predictable career, had led him away from a more vibrant, yet passionate existence he believed was his due. This internal conflict manifested not in grand gestures of rebellion, but in subtle evasions and a nervous habit of rubbing his thumb and forefinger together, a small, unconscious attempt to smooth out the frayed edges of his composure. His days were a delicate balancing act. He would leave for work, his pale blue eyes projecting an image of focused professionalism, only to navigate a parallel existence, orchestrated by clandestine meetings and whispered phone calls. The thrill of this forbidden entanglement provided a potent antidote to the mundane, a surge of validation that his conventional life could no longer offer. He craved the excitement, the feeling of being desired, of being seen as something more than just a husband and father. This craving, however, was perpetually shadowed by the looming threat of exposure. He knew the stakes, the potential destruction of his family, the shattering of Kelsey's trust, and the irreparable damage to his reputation. His objective was clear, though morally compromised: to maintain both his established life and his illicit affair, a feat requiring constant vigilance and an almost pathological level of compartmentalization. The truth was, Spencer didn't necessarily want to destroy his family. He simply didn't want to give up the stability and the children he genuinely cared for, while also refusing to relinquish the intoxicating allure of Kayla. He believed, in his deluded way, that he could have both, that his carefully constructed facade was strong enough to withstand the inevitable cracks. He would drive home, sometimes late, now the scent of expensive cologne that wasn't his own, clinging faintly to his clothes. The echo of laughter from a woman who wasn't his wife still in his ears. He'd greet Kelsey with practiced affection, his smile a little too bright, his eyes a little too evasive. He'd tuck his children into bed, their innocent faces a stark reminder of what he stood to lose, and the guilt, sharp and unwelcome, would stab at him. But the guilt was a temporary inconvenience, easily drowned out by the promise of the next stolen moment with Kayla. His backstory was one of quiet conformity, of a childhood steeped in the expectation of a normal life, a pressure to achieve a specific kind of success. He married Kelsey young, seeing it as a rite of passage, the next box to tick. He loved his children, but that love was intertwined with a profound restlessness, a gnawing fear that he had settled too soon, that a more passionate, vibrant life had passed him by. Kayla, with her artistic flair and infectious energy, represented that missed opportunity, that tantalizing what if. He saw her not as a destructive force, but as an escape hatch, a place where the Spencer Vickers, who yearned for more, could finally breathe. He was a man trapped between the life he had built and the life he desperately craved, using deception as his only tool to navigate the treacherous chasm between them, unaware that the foundation of his carefully constructed world was already crumbling beneath his feet, its structural integrity compromised by his own clandestine actions. Kelsey Vickers lived for the quiet hum of domesticity. At 31, her world revolved around the rhythmic cadence of school runs, meal preparations, and the comforting chaos of two young children, Lily and Tom. Her days were spent in practical comfort, usually clad in jeans, sweaters, or activewear, her long dark brown hair often pulled back into a sensible ponytail, freeing her hands for the endless tasks of homemaking. Her warm hazel eyes, once bright with contentment, had recently begun to betray a growing strain, the faint smile lines at their corners now overshadowed by deepening worry lines etched across her forehead. She had always been a trusting partner, her belief in Spencer, her husband of nearly a decade, as unwavering as the sunrise. Their life together, built on shared dreams in college and a mutual desire for a traditional family, felt solid, immutable. She had gladly put her own aspirations on hold, pouring her energy and love into nurturing their home and their children. She saw herself as the steadfast anchor, the emotional bedrock of their family. But recently, the bedrock had begun to feel unstable. Spencer's late nights, his increasing phone calls, taken in hushed tones in other rooms, his subtle emotional withdrawal. These were not just aberrations. They were hairline fractures in the foundation of her reality. Hunter Lawson, a childhood friend who had known the Vickers family for years, had voiced his own quiet concerns, his grounded, no-nonsense demeanor often clashing with Spencer's increasingly elusive behavior. Hunter's observations, once dismissed by Kelsey as the overprotective worries of a friend, now echoed in her mind with an unnerving resonance. The stable routine, once a source of comfort, now felt like a suffocating blanket. A gnawing unease had taken root, a primal instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. She found herself replaying conversations, scrutinizing Spencer's every word and gesture, searching for clues he inadvertently left behind. She'd noticed the faint, unfamiliar scent of a perfume on his jacket, the way his eyes would flicker away when she asked about his day, the new tension in his shoulders that seemed to suggest a constant state of vigilance. The emotional distance between them had grown into a chasm, and Kelsey felt herself adrift, desperately trying to bridge the gap. Her primary objective was to preserve the illusion of normalcy for her children, to shield them from the storm she felt brewing. But beneath that maternal instinct, a fierce, protective resolve was hardening within her. She needed to understand the scope of Spencer's betrayal, to confront the painful truth, and to determine whether the life she knew could ever be rebuilt, or if it was time to dismantle the ruins and start anew. Her journey was not just about discovering infidelity, it was about the profound crisis of identity that followed, the shattering realization that the man she thought she knew, the life she believed she had, was perhaps little more than a carefully constructed performance. The worry lines on her forehead deepened with each passing day, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil that was slowly but inexorably consuming her, as she grappled with the terrifying prospect of a future devoid of the trust she had always taken for granted, a future she was ill-equipped to face alone, yet increasingly convinced she must. She began to meticulously document small inconsistencies, keeping a mental ledger of Spencer's evasions, a secret strategy forming in the quiet hours of the night when the house was asleep and her own anxieties were most vocal. She was no longer just a trusting wife. She was becoming an investigator of her own life, driven by a desperate need for clarity in the growing fog of deceit. Kayla Reyes lived a life painted in bold strokes of creativity and ambition. In her mid-30s, she possessed a slender, athletic build, complemented by vibrant, shoulder-length auburn hair that she wore in loose waves, framing a face dominated by striking, intelligent green eyes. Her profession as a graphic designer informed her sense of style. She favored chic blouses, tailored trousers, and fashionable dresses that projected an image of artistic confidence and modern sensibility. A small, distinctive, silver crescent moon tattoo adorned her left wrist, a subtle mark of her individuality. Kayla's world, however, was not without its shadows. Past relationships had left her with a lingering sense of loneliness, a deep-seated longing for genuine commitment and a shared future. It was this yearning that had made Spencer Vickers's carefully constructed narrative so compelling. He presented himself as a man trapped in a loveless marriage, unhappy and seeking solace, a man who, she believed, was destined to be her soulmate. Their meeting at a professional conference had been charged with an immediate magnetic attraction. Spencer's perceived sensitivity, his charm, the way he listened intently, all resonated with her desire for a partner who understood her creative spirit and her independent nature. He painted a picture of a separation that was all but finalized, of a life with Kelsey that was merely a formality for the children's sake, a narrative that perfectly aligned with her own hopes and eased her reservations. She invested her emotions deeply, convinced she was building something real, something lasting. Her objectives were straightforward: to secure a future with Spencer, to integrate him into her life, and eventually to build a home and a family together. The thought that Spencer's life was far more entangled and precarious than he let on was an alien concept, a possibility too devastating to entertain. She saw his secrecy not as a sign of deception, but as a consequence of his difficult marital situation. She imagined their life together in vivid detail: shared dinners, creative collaborations, the quiet comfort of waking up next to the man she loved. Her days were filled with the hum of her design work, the vibrant energy of her studio, and the anticipation of Spencer's calls and visits. She decorated her apartment with a hopeful eye, envisioning it as their future sanctuary. The small silver crescent moon tattoo on her wrist, a symbol of intuition and feminine power, now seemed to mock her, a reminder of an intuition she had somehow ignored. She was, in essence, living a beautiful, elaborate dream, a dream that was rapidly approaching a brutal awakening. Spencer's fabricated persona had allowed her to bypass the red flags she might otherwise have heeded. He had masterfully played on her desire for love and stability, crafting a narrative of a man who was almost, but not quite, free. This made him all the more alluring, a challenge to be overcome, a love worth fighting for. She genuinely believed she was his escape, his path to happiness, unaware that she was merely a pawn in his elaborate game of deception. She looked forward to the day he would finally be free, the day their two worlds could truly merge, a future she envisioned with an almost fanatical certainty, a certainty that was about to be irrevocably shattered by the harsh light of Spencer's two separate lives colliding. The fluorescent lights of Spencer Vickers' home office hummed, a sound that had long ago faded into the background noise of his suburban existence. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, a night that would prove to be a pivot point, a moment where the carefully constructed facade of his life began to crack. Spencer, a man perpetually in his late 30s, sat hunched over his laptop, the blue light casting an unnatural pallor on his face. His sandy brown hair, thinning slightly at the temples, was disheveled from running his hands through it. Wire-rimmed glasses, a constant fixture, had slid halfway down his nose, and he pushed them back up with a familiar, nervous gesture. He wore a button-down shirt, the collar slightly askew, and chinos, the uniform of a man striving for professional respectability, even in the solitude of his study. His pale blue eyes, usually betraying a quiet fatigue, were wide, with a mixture of exhilaration and dread. For weeks he'd been living a double life. The mundane reality of his marriage to Kelsey and their two children, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Noah, a stark contrast to the passionate, intoxicating world he shared with Kayla Reyes. Kayla, a graphic designer in her mid-30s, with her vibrant auburn hair and sharp green eyes, had become the embodiment of everything Spencer felt was missing from his own life. He'd met her at a conference in Chicago 6 months prior, and in the whirlwind of late-night conversations and stolen weekends, he'd spun a tale of marital unhappiness, of a separation that was all but finalized. He'd convinced himself, and more importantly, he'd convinced Kayla, that their connection was something profound, something destined. But the truth was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Kelsey, his wife of 12 years, was completely unaware, and his children, the innocent anchors of his conventional life, knew nothing of the seismic shift occurring beneath their feet. He'd been composing an email, a confession of sorts, meant for Kelsey. Not a full confession, not yet, but an acknowledgement of difficulties, a prelude to the storm he knew was inevitable. He typed, deleted, and retyped. Each word felt like a betrayal, not just of Kelsey, but of the stable, albeit uninspiring, life he'd built. He remembered their wedding day, the hopeful vows exchanged at a small chapel in his hometown of Oak Haven, Illinois. Kelsey, so earnest, so trusting. He'd loved her, he truly had, in the way one loves a comfortable certainty. But that certainty had begun to feel like a gilded cage, and Kayla, with her artistic flair and confident grace, had offered the illusion of escape. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking mockingly. He thought of Kayla's small silver crescent moon tattoo on her left wrist, a detail he'd memorized, a symbol of their clandestine world. He pictured her waiting, her striking green eyes sharp and intelligent, her stylish clothes a testament to a life lived with vibrant intention, a stark contrast to Kelsey's practical ponytail and worn jeans. The sheer complexity of his lies was becoming overwhelming. He was a man trapped by his own carefully constructed narrative, a narrative designed to keep control, to avoid confronting the gnawing dissatisfaction with his conventional success, his respectable but passionless marriage. He was seeking validation, excitement, anything to fill the void. But in doing so, he was risking the very foundation of his existence, his family, his reputation. The email was intended to be a strategic step, a way to soften the blow, to preserve some semblance of his family life. But as he stared at the blank screen, the sheer weight of his deceit pressed down on him. He knew with a chilling certainty that whatever he wrote, whatever he did, the path back to his former life was closing rapidly. He was playing with fire, and the flames were beginning to lick at his heels. The words wouldn't come. Instead, his mind drifted to a stray text message he'd received earlier that day, a seemingly innocuous notification from Kayla. Can't stop thinking about our weekend. Are you still sure about everything? The ellipses hung in the digital air, pregnant with unspoken questions. It was a question Spencer himself had been avoiding. He'd sent back a dismissive, "Talk soon," a busy week. But the question gnawed at him. Was he sure? Sure about jeopardizing everything for a relationship built on a foundation of lies? Sure about the potential devastation to Kelsey and the children? The digital ghost of that text message and the growing unease it represented left him paralyzed, staring into the abyss of his own making. He closed the laptop with a soft click, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the faint glow of the outdoor security lights seeping through the blinds. The silence in the house was profound, a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened between him and his sleeping family. He stood, his body stiff, and rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, a familiar comfort that offered no solace tonight. It was Sunday, October 22nd, 2023, a crisp autumn afternoon in Oak Haven, Illinois, the kind of day that usually brought the Vickers family together for backyard barbecues or leisurely drives to the local pumpkin patch. But this Sunday, an undercurrent of tension had settled over their usually lively home at 1428 Elm Street. Spencer had been unusually distant all week, his late nights at the office more frequent than ever. Kelsey Vickers, early 30s, her long, dark brown hair pulled back in its customary practical ponytail, felt the familiar knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She'd tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to work stress. But a nagging intuition, honed by years of shared life with Spencer, whispered otherwise. She was in the laundry room, folding a mountain of towels and tiny t-shirts belonging to Lily and Noah, her warm hazel eyes scanning the familiar patterns of their small lives. Her hands, usually busy with domestic tasks, paused as she noticed a stray, unfamiliar phone charger tangled amongst Spencer's gym clothes in the laundry basket. It wasn't hers, and Spencer had his own charging station by the bed. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion she usually suppressed, flickered to life. She pulled it out. It was a sleek, modern charger, not the kind Spencer typically used. A quick glance revealed a faint, almost imperceptible smudge of what looked like glitter nail polish near the charging port. Glitter polish. Kelsey rarely wore glitter polish. Her preference was for muted, practical shades, if she wore polish at all. Her own hands, currently bare, were often busy with cooking, cleaning, or tending to their garden, not adorned with sparkles. A wave of cold dread washed over her. She stood there for a long moment. The damp towel clutched in her hand, the hum of the dryer a distant thrum. Her mind raced, replaying fragments of recent weeks. Spencer's vagueness about his late meetings, his increased secretiveness with his phone, the almost imperceptible shift in his demeanor when she asked about his day. She walked almost numbly to their bedroom. Spencer was out, supposedly at a client site an hour away, a story she'd heard variations of countless times. She looked at his phone, lying on the bedside table, a silent sentinel. She'd never snooped before. It felt like a violation, a desperate act born of fear. But the glitter polish, that tiny, insignificant detail, had planted a seed of doubt that was rapidly growing into a towering oak of suspicion. With trembling fingers, she picked up his phone. She knew his passcode. It was their anniversary, a detail she'd once cherished, now a painful reminder of their shared history. She navigated to his text messages. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room. She scrolled, her breath catching in her throat, and then she saw it. A string of messages, dated over the past several months, with a contact labeled simply Kayla R. The tone of the messages was intimate, flirtatious, and damning. There were pet names, discussions of secret meetings, plans for weekends away that Spencer had claimed were work trips. One message, sent just last Thursday, read, "Can't stop thinking about our weekend. Are you still sure about everything?" Followed by Spencer's reply, "Talk soon. Busy week." The ellipses in Kayla's message, the evasiveness of Spencer's, now took on a terrifying significance. Kelsey sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the carpet. Her warm hazel eyes, usually so expressive, were now wide with shock, the strain of recent weeks morphing into sheer, unadulterated pain. Deep worry lines etched themselves onto her forehead. She felt a profound disorientation, as if the ground beneath her had dissolved. This wasn't the stable, archetypal family unit she had always dreamed of. This was a nightmare. Her hands, moments ago so capable, now lay useless in her lap. She felt a desperate need to understand, to quantify the depth of this betrayal. Were there more? How long had this been going on? The carefully curated image of her husband, the loving father, the reliable partner, shattered into a million irreparable pieces, leaving behind only the jagged shards of deceit. Not in the comfortable everyday clothes she wore, jeans and a worn sweater, felt like a costume, a disguise for the unsuspecting wife on the precipice of a devastating truth. The sheer banality of the discovery, a phone charger, a text message, made the horror all the more profound. It wasn't a dramatic movie scene. It was the quiet, brutal unraveling of her reality, right here, in her own bedroom, on a seemingly ordinary Sunday afternoon. The realization that Spencer, the man she had devoted herself to, had been living such a profound lie, was almost unbearable. Her gaze fell upon her own hands, unmarked by glitter, hands that had always worked to build their home, their family, hands that now felt empty and betrayed. Hunter Lawson, late 30s, stood on the sidewalk across the street from the vicar's tidy suburban home at 1428 Elm Street, his dark, closely cropped hair slightly mussed by the autumn breeze. He'd been driving past, heading home after a late Sunday afternoon project meeting, when he'd seen Spencer's car, a dark blue sedan, parked haphazardly in the driveway, its engine still running. This was unusual. Spencer was meticulous, almost to a fault, about his possessions. And it was late. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows that deepened the sense of unease that had been growing around Spencer Vickers for months. Hunter, a man whose deep-set, intelligent brown eyes missed very little, felt a familiar prickle of suspicion. He'd known Kelsey since they were kids, Growing up in neighboring towns, their lives intertwined through shared childhood memories and later through Kelsey's marriage to Spencer. He'd seen the subtle changes in Kelsey over the past year. The slight strain around her warm hazel eyes, the way her usual bright demeanor seemed dimmed, masked by an almost constant worry. He'd also noticed Spencer's own erratic behavior, the increasingly frequent business trips, the vague excuses for late nights, the way he'd flinch when his phone buzzed unexpectedly. Hunter, with his broad-shouldered frame and practical, no-nonsense demeanor, valued integrity above all else. He worked in construction management, a field that demanded honesty and clear communication. He'd always harbored a quiet protectiveness towards Kelsey, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He pulled his sturdy pickup truck over to the curb, the engine rumbling softly. He watched as Spencer, clad in his usual smart casual attire of a button-down shirt and chinos, stumbled out of the running car. Spencer's movements were jerky, his face pale, his wire-rimmed glasses askew. He looked utterly disheveled, a stark contrast to his usual composed appearance. He fumbled with his car keys, dropping them on the asphalt driveway with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet street. He bent to pick them up, and Hunter caught a glimpse of Spencer's face, illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light. It was a mask of sheer panic, his pale blue eyes wide and darting, his mouth set in a grim line. Spencer looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps like a man who had just been caught. He glanced nervously up and down the street, his hand instinctively going to his slightly receding hairline, and he then practically sprinted towards the front door, disappearing inside without a backward glance, leaving the car running in the driveway. Hunter sat for a moment, his brow furrowed, the scar above his right eyebrow seeming to deepen with his concern. What on earth was going on? That wasn't the behavior of a man returning from a routine client visit. It was the behavior of someone fleeing something, or someone. He thought of Kelsey, her quiet strength often overshadowed by her devotion to her family. He thought of her children, Lily and Noah, innocent bystanders in whatever drama was unfolding. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut that he couldn't just drive away. His objectives were clear: support Kelsey, offer a voice of reason, and if necessary, confront Spencer about his increasingly suspicious conduct. He put his truck in park, a new, unwelcome resolve hardening his expression. He needed to check on Kelsey. He didn't know the specifics of what had transpired within the Vickers home, but the scene he had just witnessed was a glaring red flag, a clear indication that the carefully guarded facade of Spencer Vickers's life was not just cracking, but beginning to crumble. He noted the time, 5:17 p.m., Sunday, October 22nd, 2023. The subtle signs he'd observed for months had coalesced into a dramatic, unsettling display. He decided to wait a few minutes to give Spencer time to seemingly settle in before making his presence known. He wanted to gauge the atmosphere, to see if Kelsey would emerge, if there was any sign of normalcy. But as he watched the house, the silence now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken turmoil. The running car in the driveway, the frantic dash for the door. These were not the actions of a man at peace. The silence in the Vickers' suburban home on a Tuesday evening in late October was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant hum of traffic from the highway a few miles away. Kelsey Vickers, her long, dark brown hair, pulled back into its customary practical ponytail, sat at the polished oak dining table. Her warm, hazel eyes, usually bright with life, were shadowed, framed by deepening worry lines etched into her forehead. She hadn't touched her plate of roasted chicken and asparagus. The aroma, once a comfort, now felt cloying. Her hands, usually busy arranging homework papers or wiping sticky fingerprints from the counter, lay still, clasped tightly together. The faint smile lines that had once softened her face were now overshadowed by the visible strain of recent sleepless nights. She was wearing her favorite worn-in jeans and a soft, faded blue sweater, clothes that usually spoke of comfort and home. But tonight they seemed to emphasize her vulnerability. The weight of Spencer's confession, delivered just 2 days prior on Sunday evening after a strained family dinner, pressed down on her. "I've been seeing someone, Kelsey." The words, delivered with a peculiar flatness, echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the passionate, honest partnership she believed they shared. It wasn't just the betrayal, though. That was a gaping wound. It was the unraveling of her entire reality, the foundation of their 15-year marriage crumbling beneath her feet. Every shared memory, every whispered promise now seemed tainted, a carefully constructed facade. She traced the grain of the wood on the table, a small, repetitive motion, a physical anchor in the storm of her thoughts. Her primary objective, to maintain her family's stability and security, felt like a ship being tossed in a hurricane, its sails ripped to shreds. How could she protect their children, 8-year-old Leo and 6-year-old Maya, from this devastating truth? Spencer, the man she had married in her early 20s, the father of her children, had been living a double life. He worked as a sales manager, a profession that always seemed a bit vague to her, filled with late nights and out-of-town trips that she had never questioned. He was, in his own words, unhappy, feeling like he was missing something. A narrative he'd clearly spun to justify his actions, not just to Kayla Reyes, but to himself. He claimed he still loved her, that he didn't want to destroy the family, but his actions screamed otherwise. The someone was Kayla Reyes, a graphic designer Kelsey had never met, a name that now conjured images of stylish clothes and a life far removed from the minivan-driving PTA attending reality Kelsey inhabited. Spencer had mentioned he met Kayla at a conference. He'd described her as vibrant, creative, a stark contrast to his own perceived conventionality. He'd told Kelsey that he had been separated from Kayla emotionally for years. A detail Kelsey now understood was a deliberate fabrication. The thought of Spencer, with his pale blue, so often evasive eyes and his nervous habit of rubbing his thumb and forefinger together, being intimate with another woman, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. He was a man she thought she knew inside and out, yet he was a stranger. Her head swam with the sheer enormity of it all. The objective to salvage the marriage felt impossibly distant, overshadowed by the urgent need to simply breathe. She looked at the framed photos on the sideboard. Leo beaming on his first day of school, Maya clutching a teddy bear, Spencer and her laughing on a beach vacation years ago. Each image was a stab to the heart. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being utterly alone in her pain. She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over Hunter Lawson's contact. Hunter, her childhood friend, the one constant in her life who embodied integrity and straightforwardness. He had always been observant, his deep-set brown eyes missing nothing. He had a quiet, unassuming strength about him, a scar above his right eyebrow, a subtle testament to a life that had seen its share of rough edges. Unlike Spencer's placid, unremarkable physique, she needed his steady presence, his voice of reason. The thought of confronting Spencer again, of dissecting the lies, was paralyzing. But the alternative, living in this suffocating silence, pretending everything was fine, was unbearable. She needed to understand the extent of the betrayal, to find the strength to decide whether this marriage could ever be rebuilt or if it was destined to be dismantled, piece by painful piece. The children's laughter, faint from the playroom upstairs, and was a stark reminder of her ultimate responsibility. Their well-being was paramount. This wasn't just her crisis, it was theirs too. She closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. The weight of the truth was almost crushing, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she could not carry it alone. She had to begin the arduous process of rebuilding, even if she didn't yet know what that rebuilt structure would look like. Kayla Reyes, a woman whose life up until a few weeks ago had been a carefully curated blend of professional success and hopeful romantic anticipation, found herself staring at her phone screen with a growing sense of dread. It was late afternoon, the golden hour light of a crisp November day filtering into her stylish loft apartment in downtown Denver. Her vibrant, shoulder-length auburn hair, usually styled with loose waves, felt heavy around her face. Her striking green eyes, sharp and intelligent, were now clouded with confusion and a pain that was rapidly morphing into anger. She wore a chic, emerald green silk blouse and tailored black trousers, a testament to her profession as a graphic designer and her keen fashion sense. On her left wrist, the small, distinctive silver crescent moon tattoo was a familiar, comforting sight. But today it offered no solace. The man she believed was her soulmate, the man with whom she envisioned a future, Spencer Vickers, had become a phantom, his words to her now sounding hollow, his promises like brittle glass. The carefully constructed narrative Spencer had woven, of a marriage in deep trouble, of separation, of a life he desperately wanted to escape, had begun to fray at the edges. And it started subtly, his increasing vagueness about his family, his sudden unavailability for planned weekend trips, the strained silences when she'd gently probe about their future. Then came the cryptic text message from an unknown number, a simple anonymous warning: he's not separated. He has two young children. The message was brief, unsigned, and initially Kayla had dismissed it as a cruel prank, a desperate attempt by some jealous rival to sabotage her happiness. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it germinated with terrifying speed. She remembered the first time she met Spencer at a marketing conference in Denver. He had been attentive, charming, seemingly sensitive. He spoke of his dissatisfaction, his feeling of being trapped in a life that didn't fit him, of a marriage that had become a duty rather than a partnership. Yeah, it resonated with her own past romantic disappointments, her deep-seated desire for genuine love and commitment. She had confided in him about her own loneliness, her struggles to find a partner who truly understood her. He had seemed so empathetic, so understanding. He painted a picture of a man who was strong enough to seek happiness, but sensitive enough to feel deeply. He had been the perfect balm for her own insecurities, the promise of a stable, loving partnership she yearned for. He even alluded to the fact that his wife, Kelsey Vickers, was aware of his unhappiness, a subtle manipulation that gave Kayla a false sense of justification for their burgeoning relationship. Now, that foundation was obliterated. The image of Spencer with his receding, sandy brown hair, his wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, his unremarkable physique, and his nervous habit of rubbing his thumb and forefinger together, was no longer the picture of a man bravely seeking love. It was the image of a deceiver. Her confidence, her artistic grace, had given way to a gnawing anxiety. She paced her minimalist apartment, the polished concrete floors cool beneath her bare feet. The romantic future she had so eagerly anticipated, the integration of Spencer into her life, now seemed like a cruel fantasy. She hadn't pushed him for marriage outright, but she had believed it was on the horizon. She was investing her emotions, her time, her hopes. She had introduced him to her close friends, told them about this wonderful man who finally saw her, who made her feel alive. The thought of their pity, their judgment, was almost as painful as Spencer's deception. She had been so sure, so convinced of their connection. She even imagined a life with him, away from the shadow of his purported unhappy marriage. She had been so ready to build something real, to escape the loneliness that had plagued her in past relationships. She pictured his pale blue eyes, which she had once found so full of quiet depth, now seeing them as evasive. She remembered a recent phone call where she'd pressed him about Christmas plans, asking if he thought he could start spending some holidays with her. He had stammered, his usual smooth reassurance faltering, blaming work commitments and the need to ease his wife into the idea of them being a serious couple. She now understood his hesitation wasn't about easing Kelsey into anything. It was about maintaining his elaborate charade. The joy she felt when he was with her was now tainted by a bitter aftertaste of suspicion. She had been so convinced of his sincerity, so trusting of the carefully crafted persona he presented. Her heart ached with a profound sense of betrayal, not just by Spencer, but by her own judgment. She picked up a sleek tablet, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. She had designed so many logos, so many brands, built so many visual identities for others. Now, her own identity felt fractured. She had to face the reality that the man she loved was a lie, and the future she was building was on unstable ground. The pain of this realization was acute, a deep ache in her chest. The illusion had shattered, and the harsh light of reality was blinding. Hunter Lawson stood on Kelsey Vickers' porch in the early evening chill of November 12th, the crisp air carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. His tall, broad-shouldered frame was clad in a durable, dark blue work jacket over a gray flannel shirt and jeans. practical attire that spoke of his background in construction management. His dark, closely cropped hair was neat, and his deep-set, intelligent brown eyes, usually missing nothing, held a look of quiet concern as he watched Kelsey through the living room window. A noticeable scar above his right eyebrow, a remnant of a childhood accident, seemed to deepen when he frowned. He had known Kelsey since they were children, their lives intertwined through school, neighborhood gatherings, and shared family events. He'd seen her grow from a bright, hopeful girl into a dedicated wife and mother, and his protective instincts had always been strong. He'd also known Spencer for years, and while he'd maintained a polite professional distance, a low hum of suspicion about Spencer's character had always accompanied his interactions with the man. Spencer's evasiveness, his carefully curated image of smooth professionalism, never quite sat right with Hunter's grounded, no-nonsense approach to life. He'd noticed Spencer's increasingly frequent late nights at the office and his tendency to deflect personal questions with practiced ease. Hunter's objective was clear: to offer unwavering support and counsel to Kelsey, to uphold integrity, and to be a voice of reason amidst the chaos. He stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking faintly under his weight, and rang the doorbell. The sound seemed to reverberate in the quiet street. Kelsey opened the door, her face paler than usual, one of the worry lines on her forehead more pronounced than ever. Her warm hazel eyes met his, and in them, he saw a depth of pain that went beyond anything he had anticipated. Her usual practical ponytail seemed a little looser, strands of dark brown hair escaping to frame her tired face. She was wearing a soft, oversized gray cardigan over leggings, clothes that offered comfort but did little to mask her vulnerability. "Hunter," she whispered, her voice raspy, "thank you for coming so quickly." He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the familiar living room, noting the subtle signs of neglect: a stray toy left on the rug, a stack of unopened mail on a side table. It was unlike Kelsey's usual meticulous order. "Of course, Kel. You sounded... I'm here." He kept his tone gentle, his deep-set eyes conveying an unspoken promise of support. Then he saw her hands, usually so active, resting limply at her sides. She hadn't been able to salvage the family's stability, not yet. He could see the struggle in her posture, the immense effort it took for her to simply stand and greet him. "He told me," Kelsey finally managed, her voice barely audible. "Spencer. He told me about Kayla." Hunter nodded slowly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. His role was to be a grounded presence, a confidant. "I suspected something wasn't right," he admitted quietly, his gaze steady on hers. "He's always been a bit too slick for my liking. Too much polish, not enough substance." This was a delicate dance. He had to help Kelsey process the betrayal, to understand the extent of Spencer's deceit, not without exacerbating her pain or pushing her towards a decision she wasn't ready for. His objective was to help her navigate this crisis, not to dictate her path. "He says he loves me," Kelsey continued, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek, carving a clean line through the faint worry lines. "He says he doesn't want to destroy us. But how can he not have? How can he have done this?" Her voice broke on the last word. Hunter stepped closer, his presence a solid anchor in her turbulent world. He instinctively placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. His touch was firm, grounding. "Kelsey," he said, his voice low and steady, "Spencer's choices are his own. They reflect his own struggles, his own deceptions. They don't diminish who you are or the life you've built. What you do now, that's what matters." He looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern, but his eyes held a firm resolve. He believed in Kelsey's strength, her resilience. He knew she was capable of rebuilding, whatever that might entail. Whether it meant salvaging the marriage or starting anew, he would be there. His presence, his quiet strength, was a stark contrast to the image Kelsey held of Spencer, the late-30s sales manager, with his sandy brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and nervous habits, a man whose actions had brought them to this precipice. Hunter's scar, a mark of lived experience, was a testament to authenticity, a trait Spencer seemed to lack. He was ready to help her confront Spencer, if and when she was ready, but for now, His priority was her immediate emotional well-being. He could see the wheels turning in her mind, and the internal battle between preserving the past and facing an uncertain future. He offered her a small, reassuring nod. "We'll figure this out, Kel, together." He believed in upholding integrity, and right now, that meant standing by Kelsey. Let me know in the comment section if you've had such experience before or know someone who experienced something similar to this. How did they or how did you navigate through it? And don't forget to like this video, share, and also subscribe to this channel. I'll be back again with more stories like this. Keep an eye here.